This morning we're going to go through the lesson study rather rapidly. There are 3 questions at the end that I think are interesting, and that's where we'll finish, but I will also include a few things from the book Origins by James Gibson, which was intended to accompany the Sabbath school lesson. At least I think it was, because they both have the same picture on the front, and I don't think that's coincidence. This is the Sabbath school lesson for the first quarter of 2013, and the principal contributor is James Gibson. The editor is Clifford Goldstein, actually Goldstein, but who is actually in Advent Hope Sabbath School right now. So those of you who want to hear something from the horse's mouth, well, you can desert me and go over there. But there's a bunch of other people, of course, who've worked on it as well, and these are the ones that are listed. We've already gone through the first 3 lessons: Jesus, creator of heaven and earth, creation forming the world, and the creation completed. And now we're going to be talking about creation, a biblical theme, which is to say the creation as viewed from the rest of the Bible. We still have creation, immorality, creation in the fall, and so forth. And I think one of the benefits of looking at this lesson is that we're going to be able to go into, well, if you believe in creation, then what? Which is something that we don't always go into, but I think is important. The memory text is Revelation 14, 6 through 7 NIV. I will have to confess, I have not learned the memory verse. Well, at least not from the NIV. But I do know it from the Old King. And as I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven. How many of you know that verse? We have a few. Having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come. Go ahead. Here.
And worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and the fountains of water. Something like that.
Okay.
I'm a little rusty on it.
Now, there's the
Springs of water.
There's the NIV, which is a little bit easier to understand in some way, although to be fair, the Greek does use the word Uranos, heaven, from which we get, interestingly, the planet Uranus. And I saw another angel flying in midair, and he had the eternal gospel instead of everlasting, to proclaim to those who live on the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, instead of tongue, and people. It's literally a glosse, which is the Greek word for tongue, which did service for both tongue and language. And he said in a loud voice, fear God and give him glory, instead of give glory to him, because the hour of his judgment has come. Instead of is come, worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water. Springs instead of fountains. But you can see very close relationship, and they both go back to the Greek and do a pretty good job of translating it. Genesis 1:1 to 2:3 is the foundation for many creation texts found in Scripture. Some references to Genesis 1 are clear, others are more indirect. The more indirect references often involve a repetition of certain words or ideas without directly quoting the text, such as 2 Corinthians 4:6, for it is the God who commanded light to shine out of darkness, which of course is an allusion to the first day, who is shown in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. A direct reference, in contrast, is Hebrews 4:4, for he has spoken in a certain place. Now, this is interesting because, you don't have, you can't say in Genesis 1, or Genesis 2. All he can say is, for he's spoken in a certain place of the seventh day in this way, and God rested on the seventh day from all his works. And that's obviously just, it's quoting. But it's quoting it as with as good a reference as Hebrews can give in its day. This week we will look at various references that point back to the Genesis account and show how other Bible writers understood it as a literal depiction of human origins. Creation in Genesis 2, this is Sunday's lesson. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created in the day that the Lord made the earth and the heavens. I'll just comment that probably, if you're following the tablet theory, right there is where the first tablet ended, and the second tablet begins that way so that you know that this is a continuation of the first tablet. And also in commentary you'll notice that it says in the day. That is, of course, an incorrect translation. It really should read when. It literally is biyom, but biyom is used oftentimes in places where in the day makes no sense whatsoever. Genesis 1:1 to 2:3 is the first account of God creating our world, probably continuing on to Genesis 2:4, the first part. It forms the foundations of all the other truths that we as Christians believe. But the creation account doesn't end there. From Genesis 2:3 to the end of the chapter, we're given more details, specifically regarding the creation of Adam and Eve. Thus, we should interpret Genesis 2:4 above as the introduction, or at least the last part of it, as the introduction to a more detailed history of the creation of Adam and Eve, an act that is briefly summarized in Genesis 1:26 through 29. Some modern scholars have argued that a conflict exists between Genesis 1 and 2, but this would have been a surprise to Moses and the other biblical writers. If the stories were seen as conflicting, Moses would never have written them, especially so close together. The conflict isn't with the text, it's with those who read a conflict into them. The standard way of reacting to that from the other side is to say, well, actually, these two texts were so firmly fixed in Hebrew cosmology that they had to be left intact. And that people just tolerated the conflict. I have my doubts as to whether ancient people would have looked at it quite that way, but of course these people can look at things quite that way, so they figure the ancients could have as well. Read Matthew 19:4 to 6. How does Jesus affirm the historical truths of Genesis 1 and 2? This is one of the most striking passages in the entire New Testament. And he answered and said to them, Jesus of course, have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female? And of course that's a quote. And it's more than a quote because in ancient times you didn't have chapters and verses. You couldn't say on page so-and-so because there wasn't a standard edition. Everything was handwritten anyway. And it was a scroll, so there wasn't pages. So what you did was you cited the passage. Everybody knew which passage you were talking about, and it's intended to cover not just the point, but it's intended to pull the whole chapter in as support for your argument. So he's saying he made them at the beginning, and he made them male and female. And that's the creation account. And then said, and now he's pulling Genesis 2 into it, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. And of course this particular passage has been quoted any number of times at marriages. But the thing that's interesting to me is that he says Moses said that for their hardness of heart. Now, he said that at first in Mark, and in Matthew's account it comes afterwards. But it's interesting that for Jesus, creation trumps the Mosaic law. think about that. That was bold. In response to the Pharisees' question about divorce, Jesus quoted from both Genesis 1:27 and 2:24, showing that he considered both to be discussing the same historical event. Not only a historical event, but a supremely important historical event. The creation of the world and humanity. How much more proof do we need that Genesis 1 and 2 are harmonious accounts of creation, the doctrine and teaching that forms the foundation of our existence and purpose? We are not here by chance. We are not here by fluke. We are beings made in the image of God. And the Genesis creation account, as revealed in chapters 1 and 2, is God's special revelation to us of our origins. Read Genesis 2. How does this help us to better understand what it means to be human, to be made in the image of God, and to be given free will? I hope you all have read Genesis 2 because I'm not going to put it up on the screen. It's a long passage. But we're going to read some of the shorter ones that have to do with Genesis. Read Psalm 8. What links do you find with Genesis 1? And Psalm 8 is the one that starts out, our Lord, how excellent is thy name in all the earth, who has set thy glory above the heavens. Then out of the mouth of babes and sucklings, which is one that Jesus quoted in the New Testament. And then the one that we're all familiar with, when I consider thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained, what is man that thou art mindful of him? For those who claim that the universe is so much vaster than anybody had any idea in the old days, just remember that for the old days, they also didn't move as fast, so something that perhaps was or was not as vast still was more impressive to them because their ability to move was less than ours. And then it goes on, what is a man that thou art mindful of him, the son of man that thou visitest him, for thou hast made him a little lower than the angels, and hast crowned him with glory and honor, and thou hast made him to have dominion. And you may remember that's a quote from Genesis 1, or at least paraphrasing this particular thing. The dominion over the earth, the dominion over the animals of various kinds, and the fowl of the air, the fish of the sea. And of course, that's listed in Genesis 1. And finishes up, O Lord, how excellent is thy name in all the earth. Read Psalm 104. Note how this psalm praises God for his goodness as seen in both the creation and the providence. Identify the links with Genesis 1 in the following verses from Psalm 104. And there are the verses they want us to read. I'm going to just read those verses because obviously Psalm 104 is, again, a fairly long passage. Verse 2, who covers thyself with light as with a garment, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain, shades of day 1 and day 2 of creation. Laid the foundations of the earth that it should not be removed forever. Thou coverest it with the deep as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. At thy rebuke they fled. At the voice of thy thunder they hasted away. There again, the story. They go up by the mountains. They go down by the valleys unto the place which thou hast founded for them. Thou hast set a bound that they might not pass over, that they might not turn again to cover the earth. Genesis 3, and that's the way it is. He causeth the grass to grow for the cattle, Genesis, this third day, and herb for the service of man, that he may bring forth food out of the earth. And then it goes on in 19 to say he appointed the moon for seasons, the sun knoweth his going down. And then we talk about the fifth day. So it's this great and wide sea where things creeping innumerable, both small and great beasts. And it will go on to describe the beasts of the earth as well. The psalm is a psalm of creation. Now, what's interesting is that if you want to, you can try to make slight deviations from the standard story. I'm not sure that that's fair in something that's obviously poetic. It is fascinating to me that people will argue that Genesis 1 is poetry and then therefore should not be paid strict attention to, and yet we'll take this passage and try to make this into prose. there's a problem there somewhere. Note how the Psalm's topical sequence seems to be crafted to follow the topical sequence of Genesis 1. It is. Poetic imagery is vividly presented throughout the verses, and its message clearly includes the power, wisdom, and goodness of God and the dependence of all creation on the Creator. Nothing in the Psalm hints that the Genesis account was not to be taken literally. If anything, this is a kind of concerto on a theme, if you want to put it that way. Note the following examples from the Psalms that correlate with Genesis 1. And there are a number of them that they give, and we're going to go through them. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. For he hath founded it upon the seas and established it upon the floods. God put the earth there. By the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the hosts of them by the breath of his mouth. And you may remember verse 9, for he spake and it was done. He commanded and it stood fast. The 16 and 17 of let's see, which one was that? That was Psalm 74. The day is thine, the night also is thine. Thou hast prepared the light and the sun. Thou hast set the borders of the earth. Thou hast made summer and winter. Correction, thou hast set all the borders of the earth. So you have somebody who's praising God for the act of creation. And then in 89:11, the heavens are thine, the earth also is thine, and as for the world and the fullness thereof, thou hast founded them. The Psalms are full of praise for the Creator. Sometimes this is expressed in language reminiscent of Genesis 1, other times the language is more general. But in all cases, the description of creation is consistent with Genesis 1 and reminds us of the foundational role of Genesis in our understanding of our origins as sons and daughters of God. Creation in the book of Job. Read Job 38, 1 through 21. Note the creation topics in the following verses, and those are the verses, and we're going to go through them as well, since they're relatively short. 4 through 7. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declarest thou, if thou hast understanding? Who laid the measures thereof, if thou knowest? Who hath stretched the line upon it? Whereupon the foundations thereof fastened, or who laid the cornerstone thereof? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. And of course that verse has been taken to mean that there were other creatures that were in existence when the earth was created, at the very beginning of the creation of the earth, which implies time before creation of some kind. And continuing on with verse 8, or who shut up the sea with doors when it brake forth, as if it had issued out of the womb? When I made the cloud the garment thereof, and the thick darkness as a swaddling band for it, and brake up for it my decreed place, and set bars and doors, and said, hitherto shalt thou come, but no further, and here shall thy proud waves be stayed. And then verse 12, which they have as the next part, hast thou commanded the morning since thy days, and caused the day spring to know his place? Where were you in the fourth day of creation? Hast thou entered into the springs of the sea, or hast thou walked in search of the depth? Where is the way where light dwelleth? And as for darkness, where is the place thereof? And it's important to remember the context of the book of Job. Great tragedy struck, and Job was struggling to understand how this could happen to him, a faithful follower of God. It isn't fair. And his friends came by and said, no, it isn't fair. See, the problem is that it is really fair because you haven't been doing what you're supposed to. And Job knew better. From chapter 38 through chapter 41, the Lord continues to talk about his creative power, and all in response to Job's pained questioning. Read carefully Job's response to the Lord in Job 42, 1-6. Why did Job respond as he did, and what can we learn from his response that could help us to trust God in our own personal tragedy? Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that thou canst do everything, and that no thought can be withholden from thee. Who is he that hideth counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered that I understood not. Things too wonderful for me which I knew not. I Hear, I beseech thee, and I will speak. I will demand of thee, and declare thou unto me. And of course, he's quoting himself. I have heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye seeth thee. Wherefore I abhor myself and did repent in dust and ashes. And Job is saying, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm kind of reminded of the old song, Farther Along, We'll Understand Why. Job's inability to explain features of the creation led him to recognize the greatness of God and to trust him despite everything that had happened. We also find ourselves unable to answer many questions about the creation, and Job's example should encourage us to trust God no matter what. Many questions about everything in life will remain unanswered, at least for now. We will have an eternity to get explanations for what now seems incomprehensible. The point is that through the marvels of creation, which we today understand so much better now than Job ever could, we should learn to trust in God's incredible love and power. We today, living after the cross, have a view of the Creator and also of our crucified Redeemer, something that Job never had. And also a clearer understanding of the adversary, something that Job did not obviously have, although he figured out that there must be one. If it is not he, then who's doing it? How much more then should we trust in the Lord's goodness towards us, knowing what he did for us? Creation and the prophets. For thus saith the Lord that created the heavens, God himself that formed the earth and made it, he hath established it, he created it not in vain, he formed it to be inhabited. I am the Lord, and there is none else. This, of course, is last week's memory verse. Isaiah 45:18 emphasizes God's intention to prepare a place for humans to live. Thus, the fitness of earth for life is not an accident. Consider some of the features of earth that make it a fit place for human life. We've done this in previous lessons. In contrast to other planets in our solar system, first, water is present in abundance. There's some evidence of water activity on Mars, but there are no standing bodies of waters on Mars or on any other planet aside from Earth. Another unique feature of Earth is the composition of the atmosphere, about 21% oxygen and 78% nitrogen. Other planets have atmospheres dominated either by carbon dioxide, as in Mars, and Venus, or helium, or no atmosphere at all, such as Mercury. But only Earth has an atmosphere suitable for life. The range of temperatures on Earth is suitable for terrestrial life, unlike any of the other planets in our solar system. That's definitely true. This is due to a combination of factors, including our distance from the sun, the composition of our atmosphere, the mass of Earth, and the speed of its rotation, which determines the length of days and nights. All these features and more make Earth the only known planet suitable for sustaining life. How do the following texts relate to the events described in Genesis 1? And we're going to go through them. Isaiah 44:24, thus saith the Lord thy Redeemer, and he that formed thee from the womb. I am the Lord that maketh all things, that stretcheth forth the heavens alone, that spreadeth abroad the earth by myself. I'm doing it. Nobody else is doing it with me. And interestingly, stretcheth forth the heavens and spreadeth abroad the earth. Spreading abroad the earth is a familiar verb to you now, I think. It's the verb rakah, from which we get rakia, or the firmament. Isaiah 45:12, I have made the earth and created man upon it. I, even my hands, have stretched out the heavens, and all their hosts have I commanded. Notice that the heavens are stretched out commonly. Jeremiah 51:15 and 16, for he hath made the earth by his power, he has established the world by his wisdom, and has stretched out the heavens by his understanding. Some more stretching out of the heavens, which suggests that perhaps the rakia is really the stretched out stuff, not the hard dome that was beaten. When he uttereth his voice, there is a multitude of waters in the heavens, and he causeth the vapors to ascend from the ends of the earth. He maketh lightnings with rain, and bringeth forth the wind out of his treasures. Amos 4:13, For lo, he that formed the mountains and created the wind and declareth unto man what is his thought, that maketh the morning darkness and treadeth upon the high places of the earth, the Lord of God of hosts is his name. In Jonah 1:9, Jonah is talking to the people who are on the boat with him. I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who hath made the sea and the dry land. And Zechariah 12:1, the burden of the word of the Lord for Israel, saith the Lord, which stretcheth out forth the heavens, and layeth the foundations of the earth, and formed the spirit of man within him. And by the way, if you're interested in that, stretcheth out the heavens, or stretcheth forth the heavens, it's the word natah, which is the word that talks about when Moses stretched out his rod. So it gives you some kind of an idea of the kind of thing we're talking about. Think through the implications of our origins and why getting them right is so important to our understanding of whom we are, why we are here, and what we can hope for in a world that, in and of itself, offers no hope at all. Creation in the New Testament. Read Acts 17:22 through 31. What were the circumstances of this sermon? After Paul had introduced his topic, what was the first topic he brought to those learned men? And what does Paul say is the relationship between the Creator God and humans? Now we're just going to go through verses 22. I think I started with 24. But this is Paul on Mars Hill. And he's talking to the philosophers of his day, and he said, God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that he's Lord of heaven and earth, dwelleth not in temples made with hands. Which is a very nice idea to the Greeks, you see, because what it said is that God is transcendent beyond the things of earth. They were with him at this point. Neither is worshipped by men's hands as though he needed anything, seeing that he gives to all life and breath and all things. He doesn't need your offerings. Again, this is good. And hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on all the face of the earth. This is getting a little shaky because the Greeks are, better stocked than everybody else. Those other people are known as barbarians because they got bar, 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 bar. That's how they talk. And was made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on all the face of the earth, and hath determined the time before appointed, and the bounds of their habitation, that they should seek the Lord, if haply they might not feel after him and find him. Though he be not far from every one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being, as certain also of your own poets have said, for we also are his offspring. And that is a direct quote from one of the Greek playwrights, by the way. So Paul knew not only his Bible, but he also knew his Greek playwrights, or at least some of them. The audience here, no doubt, included two groups of philosophers known as Stoics and Epicureans. Stoics affirmed the reality of design in nature, while the Epicureans denied it. Neither had a knowledge of the true God, but their arguments about design were similar to many of the arguments still discussed in our day. And that is true. Intelligent design is not a new movement. It's been around for a long time. The important point here is that in his witness to these pagan thinkers and intellectuals, Paul reverts directly to the argument of the Lord as the creator of all things and all humanity. Paul had little in common with these people, so he went right to what they did have in common, the fact that they existed. And from that undeniable reality, he sought to build his argument. Here we see creation again as a crucial theme in Scripture. If you're going to reach the really sophisticated pagans, creation is your best entree. Look at the following text, Matthew 9, 4 through 6, Mark 2:27, Luke 3:38, John 1 through 3, 2 Corinthians 4, 6, Hebrews 4, 4, James 3, 9. Ooh, that's a lot of text, and actually I'm going to let that one slide. Hopefully those of you who were studying looked at some of those. What's fascinating is that each one of these New Testament authors, either directly or indirectly, makes reference to the Genesis creation account. More evidence proving just how universally accepted the Genesis account of origins was to all the Bible writers. And there's really no good way of disputing that. Read Revelation 4:11 and 10:5 through 6. What do the heavenly beings say about God's creatorship? That's a relatively short list, and we will go through that. Thou art worthy, O Lord, this is 4:11, to receive glory and honor and power, for thou hast created all things, and for by thy pleasure they are and were created. And the angel which I saw stand upon the sea and upon the earth lifted up his hand to heaven, and sware by him that liveth forever and ever, who created heaven and the things that therein are, and the earth and the things that therein are, and the sea and the things which are therein, that there should be time no longer. Now that's an interesting series. It follows the fourth commandment, but it has a couple of extra, the things that therein are. If you want to know, that actually came from Nehemiah, who was probably also quoting within some expansion the fourth commandment. But Nehemiah has the same idea that the heaven, the things that are in, the earth and the things that are in, and the sea and the things that are in. Creation was not an accident, but occurred by the will of God. The second passage contains a clear allusion to Exodus 20:11. Once again, as in John 1 through 3, John shows his familiarity with and confidence in the creation story. How foolish for us to do anything less. And then they have for further study, this is Friday's lesson, so we're almost done. The Bible is a book about God and his relationship to us humans in our world. The events of Creation Week are unique and supernatural. They are outside the realm of scientific inquiry for at least two reasons. First, they're singularities. Singularities are events that only occur once. Science is the study of the reproducible. So how do you study a singularity when it can't be reproduced? At least scientifically, how do you study it? Science has a difficult time dealing with singularities because they cannot be repeated and tested under differing circumstances. Second, the creation events were supernaturally caused. They were not the natural result of the way that God sustains the creation. They were special direct acts of God. Science deals only with secondary causes and does not, at least as now practiced, accept any explanation that depends on God's direct action. Because the creation events are unique and supernatural, they lie outside the reach of science, at least as it's currently practiced. One's view of origins has important implications for one's view of human nature and self-identity. Understanding our origins is so important that God had it placed as the first subject in the Bible. And the message of the Bible is based on the historicity of the creation account. To claim that we can learn the true history of our world through science is to claim that it can be explained without appealing to any direct action of God, an error that has led to more error. And Ellen White, in the Spirit of Prophecy, says, men will endeavor to explain from natural causes the work of creation which God has never revealed. But human science cannot search out the secrets of the God of heaven and explain the stupendous works of creation, which were a miracle of almighty power, any sooner than it can show how God came into existence. Creation and redemption leaked. The Genesis 1 and 2 are not... This is a summary of the chapter in Origins by James Gibson that are intended to go along with this week's lesson. And so the chapter is entitled Creation Throughout the Bible, which is almost but not the same as the title in the lesson study. Creation and redemption are linked. Genesis 1 and 2 are not contradictory. And he makes the point that that should be the starting assumption, which oftentimes it is not. There is a school of thought that looks at the Bible as it must be contradictory unless proven otherwise, which is, you would never apply that to any other literary work. So when people say they're treating the Bible just like every other text, they're wrong. They're actually treating it worse than they would other texts. And I think it's reasonable to say when you have an author that has put something together, you would naturally assume it was not contradictory unless proven otherwise, rather than vice versa. The texts we read in the lesson are only a small sample, and the book has many more texts. So creation throughout the Bible, it's just all over the place. In his book, James Gibson notes that radiometric dating is a problem. The one thing I really wish had gotten into something in here is that while most of radiometric dating is a problem, which has been mitigated recently, but it's still arguable that it's an unsolved problem. Carbon-14, on the other hand, is actually a problem for the other side and is an encouragement to us. And unfortunately, that particular point was not made. And then in his book, Origins, he recommends Ariel Roth's book, Origins. And he recommends Leonard Brand's book, Faith, Science, and Earth History. And if you want to look at a good in-depth treatment of the knowledge that we have on various subjects relating to creation, relating to the age of the earth and the age of life on earth, it will be difficult to do significantly better than Ariel Roth's book, Origins, or Leonard Brand's book, Faith, Science, and Earth History. And then I kept the discussion questions for the last slide because I think this is a good jumping off point. I didn't find anything that was particularly striking in the Teacher's Quarterly, so I'm omitting that material at this point. Number one, the question is, creation is a dominant theme through the entire Bible. Is there any evidence that Bible writers had different views of creation, or that any of them had doubts about the veracity of any parts of Genesis? Question is that true? And is your answer important, and if so, why? Number two is, what reasons do you think someone might give to justify the rejection of the idea that nature is designed? Can you think like your opponents? And number three is, Jesus endorsed the authority of Moses, Luke 16:29 through 31, including the story of creation, and he cites Mark 2:27 and 28, and Matthew 19:4 through 6. And while we're at it, you probably should put with that Mark 10, the early few verses. Given this background and the example of Jesus, what should be our attitude toward the story of creation? And normally, this is the time for question and comments, but I'm going to put those back up so that they can kind of remind us and turn on the lights and give you all a chance to make your questions and comments.
I always like to get things started. I watched Nova this week, and of course it is not creationism, but, quote, science. Certainly they don't mention anything like we're discussing today, but one of the things they said was they took Hubble, focused it on a dark spot in the heavens where they could see nothing. They said it was like looking through a straw, what little area they could research. And they saw, with this new powerful telescope, billions of galaxies. So they're expanding the universe further and further out. And of course, they measure light and tell us that it's 13.6, 13.7 billion years old. But for me, it increased the size of the universe almost to infinity. I don't know why we would stop. But it still leaves me confused about such things as black holes. I think you mentioned they were still theoretical. They postulate a black hole at the center of every galaxy. And, of course, supernovas and universes, things colliding and whatnot, which wouldn't seem to me to be in God's created universe. I still puzzle over that.
Well, from what I understand, we're more valuable than many sparrows. I rather suspect that we're more valuable than many stars that don't have life on them. Or life
By the
on
way,
other
they did
planets.
say that now they have discovered thousands of planets
Oh, yes.
around stars. So
But not all of them are inhabited in all probability. Some of them are way too hot for life. Some of them are way too cold for life. Some of them have atmospheres that are probably poisonous to most life. Certainly suggesting that intelligent life probably doesn't exist on them. And, you know, we go and looking at other places on our own solar system. There was hope at one time for Mars having life on it. I think as time goes on, that hope is starting to fade somewhat. Although I rather suspect that hope springs eternal in these people's minds, because, you see, if life arose on Earth, and if life arose on Mars, then life arises easily, and therefore the problem with spontaneous generation must be wrong. There's something wrong with our objections to it, and therefore we don't need God to get life started as well as to get life advanced to the stage where we are now. It's probably fair to say that the search for life in the universe is actually if I can put it that way, it is an atheistically driven search right now.
where do we put the beings that were rejoicing over the creation of the earth?
I don't know. Perhaps in this universe, perhaps in a parallel universe. It's hard to say.
I should mention we have two important people here this morning by the name of Warren Johns. The one behind me is a very prominent attorney and has written several books on creation and can tell you and teach you a lot. One to my left is associate editor of Ministry Magazine for a while and studied into this, has written many articles related to creation, and I just thought I'd mention that they're here among us, and if they have some contribution to make, we'd appreciate it. With reference to galaxies colliding, I get the same reaction. I wonder if this is somewhat wishful thinking to try and suggest there is not guidance and the universe is a chaos there. I don't know how good the evidence is that they're colliding. They keep talking, well, these two are going to get together and pretty soon this is going to happen. You know, there's supposed to be one galaxy run to Andromeda and so on. I feel that that's probably driven by maybe some ulterior motives. I might be wrong, but like the question of life originating on Mars, you know, I kind of suspect it's in that, maybe in that same category there. What I wanted to mention in connection with this lesson here is that so much, or so many, I should say, of the mainline Protestant churches they accept the Bible, they take it, certain parts very seriously, but they do distinctly try to separate Genesis 1 to 11 from the rest, stating that that is prehistory. It's just an introduction. It's allegorical. It's myth, and so on. Derogatory terms for it, and this is not a position that you can defend at all if you accept the rest of the Bible. I think that it's a point that we need to keep in mind in connection with this particular lesson. To me, that's the big important thing of this lesson, is that it does clearly challenge that very common argument used to try and reconcile some kind of theistic evolution with creation by saying, well, the first 11 chapters of the Bible, they're not true, but the rest, we follow the rest. Well, if you follow the rest, you can't make that statement that the first 11 chapters are allegorical.
Well, I am particularly struck by the argument that Jesus makes about divorce. Moses clearly said, if you divorce somebody, you got to make it legal. You got to give them a written piece of paper so that they can walk away and say, no, I don't belong to that guy anymore. Which was a way of mitigating a person who would be divorced but who didn't have anything clearly saying that anybody else could get married to her. She'd kind of be left in limbo. And Moses is saying, no, you make a divorce, you got to make it legal. And then, they ask, well, what can you get divorced for? And Jesus goes right past Moses, right past the law of Moses, and says, yeah, Moses said that. He said that because you guys couldn't live up to the perfect standard. But here's the perfect standard, and it comes from the creation. Saying that the creation account was more important than the law of Moses. That was revolutionary. Now, if that's the case, then what it's saying is that the creation account is more fundamental to our theology. I just don't see how you can do that with a mythical event and the law of Moses, and I don't see how Jesus would have done it either. If you really want somebody's authority, if we're Christians, if we're followers of Jesus, I don't see how we can possibly do anything else other than follow him in this particular regard. Now, if we're kind of half Christians, well, we'll believe Jesus when we want to. If we don't realize all that Jesus has to say, I'm willing to say that there are people who don't understand all of the implications of what they're doing. And I don't think that everybody who disagrees with me is therefore a bad person. But I think that if you think about it really carefully, I think that you don't really have much choice but to come to the conclusion that Jesus believed in creation, and if we're going to be following Jesus, we have to as well.
We could just add that he also referred to the flood, which is so important in our interpretation of the fossil record and the rocks out there.
Yeah? Well, the truth of the matter is, if you believe in creation and you're a scientist, you're pretty much stuck with a flood. You don't have much choice, because otherwise you can't explain the geologic column and the fossil record. Warren.
Yeah, I'm proud to be named after my uncle, Warren L. Johns. To keep everyone straight, I'll have to point this out. We have different middle names, different middle initials. And my uncle has been the attorney at the General Conference. I think it was about 18 years, was it? Something like that? Yeah, 17 years. Yeah, he was lead attorney for our GC organization, fought many a battle, and after he retired, he's fought battles on creation, written 3 books, and they're advertised out on the web there. But I didn't want to make this a commercial. I just wanted to.
You're Warren H., right?
And I'm Warren H., and H stands for homiletical because I have been a preacher. Legal and homiletical. So that's how we keep people straight. Anyway, 2 weeks ago I was here. Last week I was at the Chinese church giving talks on creation. 2 weeks ago we talked about the 4th day, and I think our lesson today might shed a little light on the 4th day because one of the texts was Psalm 8, and it describes the moon with particular phraseology I think is very important. And verse 3, when I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained, what is man? Now, we often skip over verbs. We're more interested in nouns and verbs. Hebrew, as you know, in the Hebrew language, the verb is of prime importance. Nouns are often constructed out of verbs, like you mentioned rakah and rakia. And so we should not be skipping over verbs. You know, the verb's stretched out. That's an important verb, as we've talked about. And here it says that the moon and the stars were appointed, King James, and I have the New King James. It says the moon and the stars which you have ordained, maybe a little more accurate than the word appointed. So it's possible on the 4th day that the magnificent work of the Creator was to ordain something that was unordained, give something a commission, give something a task. And that's the sun to rule the day and the light to rule the night, or the moon to rule the night. So I don't want to water down the impact of the 4th day. As I mentioned 2 weeks ago, there's a Seventh-day Adventist dissertation at IS University by Daniel Bediako, and he concludes that the flow of thought and the usage of certain set phrases that repeat themselves indicates that on the 4th day God did bring something into existence. Possibly the flow of thought is to suggest that God brought into existence a new functionality, which is to rule the day and the night. So I'm opening the door a little bit for the idea that the universe was very old. That Ellen White certainly supports that. And even our solar system may have been around before day 1. Now, last week, you weren't there. I was at the Chinese church. We were talking about what God did on the 1st day. And he created the light and the darkness. We often think that God's first act was to create light. But if you go to Isaiah 45:7, it says, I formed the light and created darkness. The word create is used of darkness. We don't give darkness any existence, or there's no physical substance there. And I said, well, what about black holes? They're dark. What about dark matter now? We use the term matter for darkness. And in the biblical thought, darkness was seen to be a reality that God was in control of as creator. And so God may have been creating for, I think, long ages before day 1, and he certainly created the darkness probably before day 1 even. You know, and then it says he formed the light. That verb form is the same verb in Genesis 2 verse 7, where God took the dust of the earth and he formed man. So was there something pre-existent before man was formed? Well, we think there was dust. God used the common elements, and we're made of all these common elements. So if God as creator, if he forms light, I think figure of speech I get is that he takes the light, which is in a chaotic condition, Genesis 1:2, it's tohu and bohu. It's, just without being directed for a functionality. He takes it and he forms it and puts it together in a package and creates something new, and that's day one. See, day one did not exist before then. And so you can create time also. As I pointed out last week, you create time as part of God's act of creation. And the Sabbath is the culmination of creating time, which in the Jewish mind had substance to it. We don't. We think time, you can't touch it, you can't see it except on the clock. I've used up too much time. I want to hear from the rest of you.
Go ahead.
Back in my college days, in physics class, we were working on a project where we made a light diffractor in a totally black, light protected environment, so that we could then roll into this a roll of this 36 millimeter, 35 millimeter film, a full 36 exposure roll in this little slot, then expose different materials to this little bit of light to go through it and see what came out on this thing. And it was fascinating because on one of the ones, the amount of visible light was literally a 1/4 inch of that, and all the rest was infrared and ultraviolet light. And this one little material of gold had multiple things all the way through from both the invisible spectrums, both infrared and ultraviolet, and just a little tiny, this one little 1/4 inch, which was our visible light area. It had a few little things, but it had things scattered all the way up and down on both sides. And when you read in the Bible how we're going to have transparent gold in heaven, I can then see how that could be, because here were all of these other pieces of light emanations from this little piece of gold that we can't see, but something else can see.
Comment here and then over here again.
What really blows my mind sometimes is not so much the creation, but it's us. How in the world do we get where do we get our meaning for words? It's just fascinating to me. To me, it just seems like meaning, I just don't know where we get it. I mean, it comes and it becomes consistent with everybody and all that. I remember Warren said, that God created the dark, and I thought for a minute, you know what, I can create it too. I can just turn off a light. I created the dark. So, when it comes to meaning of words, that's what we're really fighting for, to understand what the meaning of what God has said through these words. He says he created the heavens and the earth through his word. Well, that's what we're doing. We're trying to find out what that word was and what the meaning of that word was. It's just really something. There's so much symbolism in everything. And that's really what we're trying to understand. And yet, we've got this idea of the literal versus the symbolic and all this stuff. And yet, when you come right down to it, everything's symbolic.
Speaking of that, it's kind of interesting because one of the projects that I'm working at right now is creating a dictating system.
What?
A dictating system. Using a program called Dragon. And you speak into it and it types the words out for you. We're literally creating with our word. Creating documents, pieces of paper that will be translated into patient care and hopefully better patience, and will also be translated into billing systems and hopefully more money for the hospital. It's fascinating that we're starting to get a little tiny bit of that creating with words that God had in the beginning, and starting to understand a little bit more about how you can create with words. And we do create stuff, and it has consequences.
Oh, I was just going to, I had been looking for this verse that you projected. It's Psalm 74, where is it? 16, it says, the second part, thou hast prepared the light and the sun. Well, it struck me. And you were talking about that idea about the sun, the first day and then the fourth day. Why do they differentiate? I guess this light could stand for luminary, but it can also stand for the element light, according to what I read in
Which text was that?
Psalm 74, 16.
74.
And there was another one that had the similar idea, and I don't know where that one is. I'd have to read the whole lesson over again to find it, I think. But there were two verses in different books, and this was one of them I found.
74, 16.
16. I thought maybe that was the one you were going to, second one you were going to mention.
There's one in Psalm 89. Did I mention Psalm 89? I don't think I did. I
Okay.
was going to.
Yeah, that's or Shemish. Shemish is, of course, the standard name for the sun,
Right.
and Maor is light. It's the yeah. Interesting that they make a differentiation, almost as if they're seconding the first day versus fourth day, that the sun was in fact not there on the fourth day, on the first day.
I think it's Psalm, looks like 89, verse 37. It's actually two verses in Psalm 89 I want to point out. 89, verse 37. And it's in the previous verse, it's talking about God establishing his throne as the sun. So, sun is the subject. So, verse 37, it can refer to God's throne, which already is compared to the sun, but it shall be established forever like the moon. So, we're talking about something being established. Maybe not so much brought into existence, but being made firm or established or whatever. So, that's just a little insight. Then to go along with creating what we call non-material things, look at verse 12 there. Verse 12, the north and the south, you have created them. Now, show me where north is and show me where south is.
Well, that's easy. It's the South Pole and the North Pole.
And there's a barbershop pole in each place. Yeah, we materialize what the Bible considers immaterial, but important and real. And I have to say, based on my research on the days of creation, even time was real. It's literal, it's important, it has a material existence. Once God establishes time, you can't change it. It's there. So we need to get that Hebrew view of the material versus the immaterial, and it's all under the control of God.
Where are Tabor and Hermon? Was one in the north
Comment in
and
the
one in
back
the
here.
south?
Yeah, they would probably be north and south. Herman was far north. Yeah, north and south.
Again, languages and words are fascinating, and root derivations are very informative. I chose the New International Version for several decades because I trusted the translators to be as accurate as humanly possible. I was impressed once between two versions of that same version, two editions. They changed a verb to the aorist punctiliar from what it was before. And I thought, if anybody will go to that trouble of putting out a new edition with these improvements, little checks, then we can trust them. But we're still dealing with foreign language, Hebrew, Koine Greek, what they were thinking when they used those words. I sometimes fear if you don't understand Greek and Hebrew, you can't be saved.
Well, I think it's probably
Can
fair
you
to
get
say.
can you get the message without knowing Hebrew and Greek? Sure you can. And then to try to determine what they were thinking, I saw advertised in one of these biblical journals the scriptures as the Hebrews understood it. You know, somebody saying this is what they thought, this is what they understood when they wrote. And it was extremely expensive, so I didn't get it. But I may be lost because I don't understand what the Hebrews were thinking when they wrote.
Well, the truth of the matter is about 98% of the meaning will come through a translation most of the time. It's even translations that are undertaken for theological reasons, where the theology may be not completely correct, will still get enough through that you can usually show that the theologians weren't looking carefully enough at the text, and they let a few of them go by. I think the idea that there might be a little tiny mistake in there somewhere that we're going to miss, and therefore we shouldn't study, I think is a misguided attempt. It's the fact of the matter is that you get most of it, you really do. And if you step back and allow your imagination to work a little bit, you can get even more. If you think about what the entire text is about, if you're reading the story of Joseph, for example, step back and think about what it would have been to have a family with two sisters as co-wives, and what that does to brothers and half-brothers, and and all of a sudden a whole bunch of stuff will just jump out to you that is there in the text, but it doesn't come out until you not only read it, but you also think about it, and you think about what it means. And I think that's true with the Genesis story. It's true with the stories of Jesus. It's true with the entire Bible. That asking God to be with you and then allowing your imagination to think about what's really being said here, I think will do more for you than anything else I can do. Pastor Roberts once made one point, and I'm going to kind of end with this, I think, because it's getting about that time. Pastor Roberts once said that, many people will claim that that what we really want is not rules and regulations and concepts and stuff like that. What we really want is a relationship, and that is true. But how in the world are you going to have a relationship if you don't spend time? Think about it. And that means spending time reading your Bible, spending time praying, spending time talking to God, spending time listening to God, and then spending time connecting that experience with the rest of your life. And I think I would argue that all of us can do a better job of that. And let's maybe this week start doing more of that. And we may be surprised at what it does to the rest of our life.
Amen.
We will see as many of you as possible next week, and we'll go through Lesson 5. So look it over ahead of time. If there are nice long passages like Genesis 2, read them ahead of time so that you know what we're talking about without me having to put that whole passage up on the screen.